Hey guys, good morning. I hope you all are well as we march to the end of April here, moving into May by the end of the week. Kind of crazy. But today you are taking your quiz, and I won't make this video too long, just as a additive to your quiz taking activities today. So as I mentioned last time, I was going to leave Egypt on its own little video, so that's what we're doing right now. And so looking at Egypt, we're looking at a place and a location that is southwest of Mesopotamia, which is what we talked about last time, the Sumerian area, Sumerian culture with where is present-day Iraq. Okay, so Mesopotamia, again, is the birthplace of civilization. The birthplace of all of the different elements that we discussed, the different respective discussions that were mentioned in regards to what is civilization, like occupational specialization, the use of bronze to solidify history in the form of visual arts with casting, substitution methods like casting. And the concept of the city-states, as well as an advanced form of agriculture and animal husbandry. And then, of course, the most important is writing, and that is written history that is documented and preserved throughout time. The best form of written history that is preserved is upon the surface of something that does not decay, such as stone or clay, and also embedded in bronze. So again, these were four main purposes of civilization and how that began in the Mideast, what is now today, presently, Iraq and Iranian area, far northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, so Saudi Arabia is mostly the Arabian Peninsula, and then further north up into that area is in the Fertile Crescent, is what it's called, is where Mesopotamia was. All right, so Egypt. All right, so we're looking at a place in northern Africa. All right, up and down the Nile, the South and North Nile, and Egypt is very close, like I mentioned, to the Mesopotamian area, but still there's quite a bit of distance. And so Egypt wasn't really influenced very much by any cultures outside of itself. There's a little bit of parallel that's running between the Mesopotamian and the Egyptian cultures, and you can see it in the sculptures. You can see it in the geometric clustering of shapes and simple shapes that are found in the sculptures in both the Mesopotamian bronze work as well as the stonework done, the limestone work and other stonework done in Egypt. But overall, Egypt is not influenced for close to 2,500 years, 2,500 years. There's not much influence. It influences others, such as Greece. All right, so we'll see next that Greece is heavily influenced by Egypt, and we'll talk about that a little more thoroughly. Now, one thing that the Egyptians really start to develop in this kind of 2,500 buffer year period is a standardization, and another word for the standardization is called a canon, C-A-N-O-N. And the canon, or the standardization that you see throughout three main divisions of the visual arts: architecture, painting, and sculpture. And you will see these standardizations, or these canons, kind of branch over into all three vertices, all three different departments of visual arts, if you will: sculpture, painting, and architecture. And some of the main canons, or the standardizations that you'll see, is the most prevalent is what's called a hierarchic scale. All right, and this is a size differentiation between different individuals, and their size is dictated upon their social importance. So if they're a very important individual, let's say like a pharaoh or a steward, right, or an individual that's very close to the pharaoh, their size is actually going to be much taller in the imagery or in the sculpture. And then as they as they become less important in this hierarchical scale, or quote unquote more inferior, or their position is getting further away from the pharaoh's position, then their size gets diminutive and smaller and smaller. All right. So again, the depiction of different figures is based on their social status, their hierarchy, their hierarchical status. And then also, there's what's called an archaic smile, or a smile that's very calming and very geometric and soothing in nature, almost as if unaffected. And so you'll see this smile kind of transfer throughout, especially the paintings and the sculptures. There's also going to be an indicator of a stance, and this stance is an elongation of the left foot moving forward, often seen with the pharaohs and portrayed with the pharaohs. And this stance of elongating the foot is almost like a transition, or a transcendental transition into the afterworld. And if you would stand like that, up erect, if I was in the classroom, I would show you this. If you would stand up straight, and then I'll try to keep your upper body straight, and then elongate your left leg forward, you would topple forward. You would not be able to really keep yourself held up in that fashion. So it's an exaggeration, it's an abstraction, but it's an abstraction to show, again, this moving transition into the spiritual world from the material world, all right? And so the pharaoh is seen as an individual that is going to be able to enter the netherworld, or the afterworld, okay? Also, there's a huge use of the profile. It's either you see a full frontal depiction of the individual or the figure, or you see a full profile. All right, so it's either completely frontal with all of the specifications to the front, or it's completely profile. All right, and whenever it's completely profile, there's no spatial depth. There's no implied depth at all. Okay, so there's no it's pretty much a line runs right through the middle of the face, and anything that is in front of that line is depicted, and anything behind it, any depth, is just not shown. All right. So those are some canons. Those are some standardizations that we'll see in the Egyptian work. All right. So let's start marching through this PowerPoint. Whoops. First thing I want to talk about is the architecture, the Great Pyramids. All right. So when you look at these Great Pyramids, the one thing that I really want you to focus on is the architectural construction. And we talked about this in the architecture PowerPoint, where there's something called dry masonry, right? And dry masonry is, again, stacking the stones or stacking the medium without any liquid mortar. All right, so there's no mortar that is holding the stones together. It's all its own compression. It's also its own weight. All right, and then remember, when the stones are changed or chiseled, it's called being dressed. So the stones are being dressed to get a specific type of shape that's needed to make the dry masonry work even better. All right. Now, I'm not sure, in all honesty, if the Great Pyramids of Giza, in Giza, are shaped at all. Okay, dressed. I'm sure that they are dressed to be able to get that pyramid shape, but I don't know that specifically. I can't give you that answer, but it is definitely dry masonry. Okay. And then the next are the tombs, which are another architectural feature. All right. And the great thing about these tombs that we see from Egypt is the preservation of not only the body, but also the artifacts that are buried with the prominent figures, either the pharaoh or the queens of the pharaoh, queen of the pharaoh. I think they practice. I think the pharaoh only had one queen. I don't think they were polygamous. But so the artifacts, in their view, that the artifacts are buried with the pharaoh, and the pharaoh has the ability to transfer these material artifacts and objects with them to the afterworld. I guess in a spiritual format, because obviously we have the artifacts that are present with the embalmed bodies. All right, so we do have that. We do have those they're records. So those artifacts, and as well as the preserved body, the embalmed body, allows us to be able to do scientific studies that allow us to do some dating, and then also get some form of awareness on what was used in society at a higher hierarchical scale. And the example that we have is the funerary temple of Queen Hatshepsut. So this temple is huge. You can see the image of it and the facade of it with the image that's on the PowerPoint. But what's really important here, and that's very salient, is that this is one of the first examples of showing a famous woman in art. So the Egyptians put a lot of emphasis and importance into the queens of their civilization and of their dynasties and such, like Old Kingdom and New Kingdom. So the queens are very important, and you'll see that with the hierarchic scale of one of the sculptures that are coming up, that the size of the queen is close to that of the pharaoh, but not quite. So again, this funerary temple is devoted to Queen Hatshepsut, and again, it's one of the first famous depictions of women in art. Okay, so you can see the facade and the entryway, and the tomb goes actually into the canyon into the canyon walls. And then we're looking at Senenmut, the great steward, and this is the one who actually who worked closely with the queen and the queen's daughters, and the queen and the pharaoh's daughters and daughter, and then also worked closely with the queen in regards to the building of this tomb prior to her departure. So the steward had a very high importance, and with the temple at Karnak. And then also his temple, his tomb, temple, was adjoining the queen's as well. That's how close this individual was to the queen. All right, so the stewards had very important positions with the pharaoh's family. And there's a really great grid drawing of Senenmut. And you can see it's purely profile. It's very simple. It's very geometric in nature, and there's not a lot of depth or implied depth. It's very much pure profile, and you'll see that with the actual the block statue that follows that drawing, and that everything is very blocked off and gridded off and very geometric in nature. So again, when you look at it from the side, it's pure profile. There's no emphasis on the other side. There's no emphasis of wanting to see it in the round. It's very much focusing on that one lateral side. And then frontal, it's pure frontal. When you look at it from the front, there's not an emphasis on a need or a desire to look at it from the lateral side to side, even though the hieroglyphs wrap around this stone where you see it from the side. It's very frontal, profile, and lateral in nature. All right, so the sculpture is starting to reflect that of the architecture. The architecture is very frontal, and it's very geometric and simple in nature. All right, so the canons are transitioning from the architecture to the sculptures. Okay, and then we can move forward and see the another sculpture, and it's the pharaoh Menkora. All right, the pharaoh Menkora and the two goddesses, and you can see the geometry and the focus on simple forms and simple shapes, and keeping the geometry the high point. Again, one of the canons, right? Now, when looking at this sculpture, you can start to see that hierarchic scale. Sorry, I'm having a hard time talking today. You can see that the pharaoh is in the center, all right? So that's Menkora, and he's obvious, often, not always, but men are often, a little taller than women. But in this case, you can see that the goddesses, one of the goddesses next to him, is very close to height, very, very close. All right, so, but he still is bigger, in scale. So the pharaoh is still considered greater than even these goddesses that are present with him. But notice his left leg and how it's shifting forward, all right, and the arms are down to the side. Very stoic, very equiposed, not being affected by much of anything. He has the smile. They all have this smile, this calm and controlled smile, order, and he's stepping forward. All right, he's stepping forward into the afterworld. And this sculpture, this statue of this grouping is showing that movement forward. And he's being guided, right, by these goddesses to move forward into this afterworld. So they're not needing to step forward in that. They're already really present. So they almost have a spiritual presence, and they're moving his body from the material into the spiritual, and that's why you see him stepping forward with his left leg. Also look on, let me look at it here real quick. I can't see with the sun. But there's a line that runs down the middle of his left leg, almost like this linear pattern. And it's very geometric. So his left and his right, so it would be his tibula and fibula area of his leg, is bifurcated or cut by this line in the middle, this geometry that separates the left and right side of the left leg. So again, this geometry is being used. You can also see in the pectorals, up on the chest. So everything is simplified with these geometric shapes. All right. So again, keep this in mind whenever we start to look at the Greek in the next one, because you'll see some influences, definitely. All right, and then there's the mask of the tomb, Tutankhamun. All right, so you've probably seen this before. Again, another emphasis on use of geometry, as well as looking at some abstract idealism, portraying the individual a little more idealistic than what was probably more natural for this individual. So we'll start to see that in the Greek time as well, where there's this idealism portraying an individual versus specifically or naturally what the person looks like. You also will start to see that in the Renaissance whenever we get that to the Renaissance. But the Renaissance is a rebirth of antiquity. So antiquity is looking back into the Greek and Roman times, and then the Greek and Roman times where the Greeks were influenced by the Egyptians and the Romans were influenced by the Greeks. So the Renaissance plays all the way back to these Egyptian canons as well. And then we'll look at, lastly here, the wall painting from the tomb of Nibamun. And again, it really emphasizes these canons, all right? So we're going to see a heavy use of kind of flat shapes, not very much depth, so we're not going to see any real spatial depth. Things are just kind of overlapping. There's no definition or circumference to the forms, so circumference often implies a sense of depth or moving from the foreground to the background. So the shapes are very simple. They're not confusing. They're very clear. That hierarchic scale is present where the size of humans relates to their importance in society. And then also there's an attention to the writing, right? There's the hieroglyphics. So the hieroglyphics are in place and present in here. So again, that's speaking to civilization and the desire to write and have that information available for future civilizations to read, or future individuals in society. And then also there's an interest in the detail of the natural world, which is what they were relying on. They were relying on the nature for fishing, for gaming, for hunting, for gathering. So they really emphasize the importance of nature. Now, when looking at the actual image of the wall painting from the tomb, you can see that there's a center figure that's very tall, and there's one that is diminutive underneath the legs of that individual. All right, and then there's another more feminine figure in the background. So this is that hierarchic scale. All right, the individual in the middle has a very high importance in society, since they're big, they're huge on the overall composition. And then the female figure in the background is smaller. All right, it's not that she's standing further in the background, it's that she is standing right next to him, but her size is smaller because her placement in society is not as important as the central individual. And then the third, underneath the legs of the central figure, is incredibly small, almost like a child, all right, or even a small child. But that's actually the servant. That's actually the maid servant, or the helper for the couple that's out in nature, right? So that individual is considered less important in the hierarchical scale, so they're portrayed as a smaller individual. It's not a child. This is not a family. This is a male figure that is the most important, a female figure that is related to or that is close to the male figure, most likely, wife or a paramour or something like that, probably the wife, queen. And then you have an assistant, all right, or a servant that is the smallest in scale. All right, so that's the hierarchic scale. And that's how it worked with the Egyptians. That's what they did to portray social importance. Then you have the hieroglyphics in the background depicting writing. Then you can see that there's a lot of detail with nature. There's a lot of detail with the flora and the fauna. So there's more detail actually with the flora and fauna and the nature than there is with the individuals. Let's say, the pharaoh and his queen, and then the servant. There's actually more definition with the natural world than with them. But you can see that they're simple shapes. They're not overcomplicated. There's not too much detail. There's simple overlapping of forms. They're not, they're stacked on top of each other. They're not overlapping too much to create any kind of spatial depth. They just overlap a little bit, but they overlap going up in this vertical kind of pattern. So, keeping it very simple, not making it too complex, which is just one of the many canons or standardizations that the Egyptians used. All right. So I'll leave it with that, and I'll get this posted up for you, and then I'll send you all an email and let you know what the next steps are. Hope you did well on your quiz, and I'll be talking with you all soon. Take care. Bye.